Hello, guys. Welcome to the Daily Friend, the Friday edition, which will also be the podcast edition. So make sure you guys look out for the Daily Friend podcast, which will be released on our Iono account. That's right, the Iono account. We'll link the information and under the descriptor of this video. As always, I am not alone. I've got my right honorable colleagues in here. Beginning this side from Sarah Gon, who's the chief editor of the Daily Friend. Sarah, good morning.
Good morning, Sithle.
And of course, Terence Corrigan, our writer and analyst here at the Institute of Race Relations. Good morning, brother man.
Sithle.
And the good old and trusty, and I know you guys like, Gabriel Krause, excuse me.
No.
I always have to sort of think about the surname. Gabriel Krause, of course, is our writer here and an analyst at the Institute of Race Relations. And just a quick heads up, I will be away for the next 2 weeks, and Gabriel will be leading the show, so you can look forward to that and a different way of looking at things in the next couple of weeks or so. Guys, welcome to the show. It's going to be jam-packed, and I want us to chat about quite a few things that not only happened over the week, topical stuff, and also stuff that we've been writing about. So where will we begin this? Sarah, I'm going to look straight to you and your list over there. What is top of list? What are we chatting about?
Okay. Funnily enough, it sounds rather dull, but we're talking about the end of gigantic shopping malls.
Yes.
And
which almost makes me so very, very happy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I feel the same way. But I mean, we've always been known for building too large shopping malls in South Africa, having a sort of world record in shopping malls. We beat Spain by.
This is shopping malls, by the way. I was chirping. I'm sorry about this earlier on.
Shopping malls.
Yeah.
They have refurbished they're relaunching the Fourways Mall for 9 billion rand. And it's then going to be the largest such space in Africa.
Jeepers.
But it will be the last. It will absolutely be the last. And it's a variety of reasons. The one is the middle class isn't growing enough.
Absolutely.
The other is the economy shrinking. All the obvious things. But this is where one will see it. And then there's internet shopping, which is increasing in popularity. And the youth want something that looks different and feels different. And our shopping malls have a very distinct 1970s, 1980s feel about them. But I think the final indicator of how sad this all is that the actual redevelopment of Fourways was delayed because some of the subcontractors went out of business.
Jeepers.
So it is a large microcosm, shall we say, of the disaster that is our economy.
Gabriel, there's a tale in this, isn't there? For the longest of times, there's been this weird attempt by politicians to pretend everything's okay. Yeah, the data's bad, right? But at least we're sort of trudging along. But the real economy, where ordinary people are, the jobs are, for instance, because with the slowdown comes the slowdown in the construction jobs, manufacturing the stuff that goes into the construction. This is where you really see the slowdown in the economy, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that is right. I think it can be, big manufacturing projects, construction projects can be a little bit confusing. I was just saying, you look at Sandton. One way you might doubt all of the GDP figures and the employment figures, you look at Sandton, you're like, there's this new building called Leonard, next bigger than the old building called Michael, and then there's the other building called Discovery, and they're all quite new, and it's very exciting. But the thing to bear in mind is that those construction deals, those projects, the sourcing, the financing, that was all locked in many years before the completion, many years before even the first shovel strikes earth.
That's right.
And so in a way, Sarah's tale of the sort of end of the shopping mall is a tale about like what questions are going to have people scratching their heads in 15 years are going to be, why haven't we seen construction of a shopping mall recently? We're so used to it. In the same way that growing up around the CBD of Joburg, there just came a point where there were no more new buildings being built in and around the CBD of Joburg.
Real talk.
And it takes a long time before people start thinking, oh, maybe that's because the economy's migrated, maybe that's because the economy's just shrunk. But I think what we are looking at is, the Center for Risk Analysis has found we're in the biggest negative business cycle since World War II, and it's just yet another kind of tangible indicator of, I think, a fact that you only need to convince people of when you're on TV. Because when you go out into the real South Africa and you say, there's good news, everything's working out very nicely, I've only been laughed at.
Terence, funny enough, I had this chat yesterday at an event I was doing with a group of Jewish ladies, and they were saying they were struggling to, the older ladies, and they were talking about their kids in relation to their kids. Their kids are struggling to sell their homes because most of them are immigrating, a lot for the sort of financial and economic reasons. It's the real people, as I was putting it to Gabriel, it's the real people on the ground that are feeling the effects of the slowdown. And for a lot of people, the decision is either, hey, let me leave now whilst there is an opportunity to do so, and the currency is at a point where I can afford to leave, or let me stay and face it. What is the person who stays and face it likely to deal with?
Look, I think that immigration is a drag on our economy that we can ill afford, and I think that the way it's been sort of conceptualized since the I suppose actually since the 70s, the chicken run, whatever, to try and cast it in moral terms has missed the point. I remember there was a major study of South Africa under the auspices of the African Peer Review Mechanism, and this issue was raised, the skills flight, and the government's response was, a few whites have left because they were not in sync with a democratic South Africa. Now we see surveys saying 89% of business executives or whatever color are wanting to go. And certainly anyone who knows about South African immigrant communities knows these are increasingly multiracial. Absolutely. It's a significant problem. You train a doctor, you train a nurse or whatever, and then another country gets the benefit of that. But you can't expect someone like that to sort of defer their lives and their children's lives indefinitely. What does it look like to stay here? Well, I think really you've got a choice. You accept the difficulties and you get involved in trying to resist the pathologies. There was a board game, an insanely complicated board game I used to play when I was at university, which simulated infantry combat in World War II, and the tagline on this was "Lead, follow, or get out of the way." And I think it's actually it's a very good way of looking at this. You can leave, you can follow and pretend everything's fine, or you can choose to lead. You can choose to get on board. There's something like our Unite the Middle campaign, or you can choose to just get out of the way and put on your blinkers.
You introduced a nice thing there, the Unite the Middle campaign, and we'll get into that just now. But there's something else you brought up which I think deserves a little bit of attention, and I want to throw it to the guys and see what they think. We all know that the people who are at the helm of political power in this country are sort of leftist ideologues, the people who believe in a big state, politicians running nearly anything and everything in people's lives, and very little scope and space for the individual and for the individual to pursue their own self-interests. Right. This is what we're dealing with in South Africans, it's those ideologues. Now, is it not funny when those same ideologues, when they see the middle class fleeing and leaving in increased numbers, black and white, by the way, the very same people who form the tax base that pays for all of their wonderful, grandiose political projects, is it not funny when you hear those same politicians say, let them go, they can leave, the rest of us will stay and we'll make it happen? There's a tale in that, isn't there, Sarah?
I don't know whether it's just populism or trying to put out a propaganda that says, these people are traitors, essentially. That's the implication. Or whether it's complete and utter ignorance. They're so caught up in this in the sort of their milieu of the socialist utopia that they literally don't. These things are so obvious, they're so easy to see. Everyone is talking about them, and the history doesn't support their vision. I mean, I've just finished watching the series on Chernobyl that everyone's talking about, and it's quite a staggering series in many respects, but the one in particular is the fact that the Soviet Union probably was helped to its demise with that incident because it reflected the state running the state, hiding things, lying about things,
right.
doing things on the cheap, while and people not questioning because they were terrified of what the guy above them would do. And that is the only way the states could survive until it eventually collapsed in on its own excesses. And
Gabriel, the large state, who funds it if the middle class are leaving?
Well, so the thing is, one thing is to look at the bodies getting on airplanes and going away.
Yeah.
The other thing is to look at the money itself, because you can stay here and just send your money overseas.
which people do.
And JSE's been showing sort of foreign equity negative trades sort of for the last 4 or 5 years. Momentum reckons that nearly half a trillion rand, 400 billion rands worth of wealth, 458 billion rands worth of wealth was wiped out of the middle class and some of the upper class last year alone. So I think people are kind of making this. A lot of people are making this kind of calculation. Look, anecdotally, I spoke to someone who's at a low level is involved with the pension fund, right? So he's the person that someone calls when they want to know how's my pension fund doing at this bank. And I said, what is most of your job? Like, what's the biggest thing that you do? And he said, the biggest thing that I do is convince people that we're doing everything we can to get their money offshore. And the second biggest thing I do is try to get their money offshore. So there's the perception game and there's what you're really doing game. And both of those things, he said his priority is very clear. And he's at one of the name brand banks that I won't go into details about. So yeah, people, I think the calculation of shall I send my money over now or in a few years, I think a lot of people are thinking, shall I send my money overseas now or 5 years ago?
Yeah. I think that part of the problem with the treachery is that it's a matter of instinct survival. You are, as an individual, as a member of a family, going to do what you have to do to best secure your family's future.
That's right.
And you can swing from the chandeliers as a politician and say you should care for the poor, which we're largely doing because we pay huge taxes all in all. But you are not going to dissuade people from protecting themselves financially.
I think that comes to that point you raised, Terence. The ordinary South African is likely listening to us now, and we're painting a very lugubrious picture of the economy, and rightly so, because again, we don't deal in opinion, we deal in data, hard facts, and analysis here. And there's no point in lying to people. That said, there is another tale here, because I sort of began the segment by saying, driving in here, I had the misfortune of listening to Eusebius Makeza whilst I was trying to fiddle with my radio.
No.
And predictably, guys, he was talking about race. And he used the Adam Katsavelos incident, I think he was appearing in court this week, as the hook to then segue to his usual stuff, the critical race theory stuff, whiteness, black pain, white supremacy, that sort of thing, that broad postmodernist nonsense that we are being subjected to by the mainstream media by and large. In all of that, no one really looked at reasonably reliable data sets that come out on issues of race. The Institute of Race Relations being one of them, that released its Hope Report. Now, we've done an episode on the Hope Report with Marius. We went through it in great detail, but I want us to revisit a lot of these things, and I'm going to do it in a little creative way. Having listened to Eusebius this morning, I'm going to channel his critical theory nonsense. And for a moment,
That's worse than I thought.
imagine that it is Eusebius sitting in this chair.
It's way worse than I thought.
And I'm going to put things to you. I'm going to put them to you and I'm framing it in the language of what we hear a lot in mainstream media. And I want you guys to retort, and Terence, with you having the report in front of you, resort to the data to sort of argue back against some of these points. Okay, so the first one would be this. Blah, 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 blah. Okay,
Round one.
Ding, 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 ding. I'm now Eusebius. So, guys, first of all, the fact that you're liberals and you're talking about the individual is just, it's not on. We don't live in an individual society. We live in a society where there are victim groupings, and, given the 400 years of oppression and colonialism and slavery and apartheid, blacks by and large are still victims in the society, and they face this white hegemonic, right now, I'm sitting in front of white hegemony and supremacy, and you guys expect me as a black person to then feel like I'm not a victim in society? Of course I'm a victim in society, aren't I, Terence?
Well, I can't influence the way you feel. The way you feel is the way you feel. And look, I would certainly be very cautious about telling people what they should and should not feel, particularly where we have tragedies that are within personal memories, not even within generational memories. So yes, so I think that the way that you phrase this, Sietle Eusebius, perhaps requires more nuance.
Yes.
However, what I can say is that if one looks at perceptions of being a victim, we ask people, have you experienced racism?
Yeah.
Now, this is, we don't ask people to justify it. Do you think that at some point you have been discriminated against on the basis of your race? Mm-hmm. Now, it's interesting. Has racism ever been directed to you personally? 42% of South Africans say yes. That's an uncomfortably large number. But it's very interesting to see who is saying this amongst black.
It must be black South Africans because, we're the ones who experience racism daily. White supremacy is against us.
Well, funnily enough, black Africans seem to be the most comfortable here. They said 36%. Coloured, 70%. And I think that the coloured population has always occupied this uncertain middle ground, not white enough in the past, not black enough now. Indians, 56%. White people, 52%. Has it never been directed against you? I think it's important to spell these out. Black people 64%, coloured people 30%. That's a worrying number.
So that's on the no.
Yeah, that's on the no.
64% of black people said no. I've never been.
That's correct.
So,
look, as I say, we should not get too excited about this. 36% of black Africans saying yes, that's a lot. 70% of coloured saying that's bad. 52% of white and 56% of Indians. That's worrying. But the point is that given our history, this actually seems to be fairly positive, and certainly I don't think it matches the narrative that is often put out by the, let's say, critical race theory types.
I love critical race theory. My name is Eusebius.
Well, by all means, love it.
I also love science. Like one of the big problems is that critical race theorists, as soon as they hear this kind of thing, they don't want to hear anymore because they say, but you didn't ask everyone.
Well, let me put it to you guys this way, because Terence, you're trying to confuse me with the facts and the numbers. I can see what you're trying to do here, Terence.
Sorry.
You might say that, Terence, but I put it to you, Terence, that if it weren't for government, we would be at a race war already. And if it weren't for people like me and my theories, we'd be at a race war because people hate each other, Terence, don't they?
No.
Different races hate each other.
No, actually they don't. And you don't even have to look at Institute of Race Relations stuff for this. There's a vast volume going back years and years that shows that actually South Africans, while there is what I would call, rather than racism, a kind of social distance, and this I think is a very real issue. Particularly, let's say, African people who live in poor circumstances and are not employed have very little opportunity to interact with other communities. One of the big zones of interaction is your workplace. If you don't have access to that, that's an issue. The middle classes, I mean, if you go to pretty much any Model C school, despite what our MEC for Education may think, you find a student body that is actually fairly mixed up. Well, in many ways, but the point is there is no bubbling race war there. So we also asked about do different races need each other for progress? Should there be equal opportunities for all? Okay. Amongst the population as a whole, 88% said yes. So, that's saying that, okay, maybe, I've got an issue here, I've got an issue there, or there was a slight directed at me last week. Okay, but we all realize that we are kind of on this on the ship together. Let's hope it doesn't say Titanic on the side. Okay, amongst the different groups, black people 86%, colored people 96%, Indians 100%. I'm going to shout out to the Indians out there. Whites 98%. Okay, those who disagree 10%, 12% of black Africans, 4% of coloreds, 0% of Indians. Shout out to the Indians out there, and 1% of whites. So that's essentially 9 out of 10 South Africans are saying whatever other nonsense there is going on in the background, whatever resentments or anything, this kind of idea of a non-racial future where everyone has a fair chance. That's North Korean solid. I mean, that's a Kim Jong Un.
You can hashtag that. Hey, North Korea solid.
Okay, you guys. I hear this, but Terence, I'm going to trick you now because I see what you IRR people are doing, right? Terence, you asked all the Nelson Mandela fluffy questions. Now I'm gonna go into detail,
right?
And I'll show you where there's so many divisions amongst the society. We hate each other. On sports, I am pretty sure that the average black South African wants a sports team that is 100% black, that is chosen on racial terms, because that would be a way of fixing the past pain of seeing white players on the field, whether it's rugby, cricket, or even soccer.
Okay, look.
Jeez, I think he's got you there, Terence.
He might well, because I'm the last of the great couch potatoes. I probably wouldn't be able to tell you who's playing, but I can tell you what we think about sport. Should they be selected on merit, not quotas? Well, total 83% say yes on merit. Amongst black folks, 82%, colored folks, 81%, Indians, 75%. Interesting. Indians are the most likely to think we need quotas in sport, and whites 96% say that we shouldn't. 15% of the total sample says no, we need quotas. We need quotas. Either in addition to or elevated above merit. Now, here's an interesting thing. I'm going back to the Mbeki days, where we had this sort of intellectualized two nations approach. I think he kind of rubbed the lamp and let out a genie that he thought he could control, but it sort of got away from him. At one stage, he said, "I think a few lost sports matches is a price to pay for transformation." I think that if you ask 90% of those South Africans, are you prepared to lose, your crack at the World Cup, of whatever sporting code you want to put in there, as I say, the great loss of the great couch potatoes, they would probably say, not in your life. So that's people first of all want to cheer for teams that win. At some later stage, perhaps there are some sore feelings about, I'd like to see more people who are like me, but it does not. It's not the overwhelming concern of South African sport lovers.
I'm going to bring you guys in just now because I feel like, I'm alone on this panel and it really hurts, because usually I'm in an echo chamber of the mainstream media where we have different views. But I'm going to put one last thing to you guys, because maybe I targeted sports, and sports is a bit of a low-hanging fruit. People would be Nelson Mandela-esque about that. But on the real racial issues, you see it on economic issues and whether empowerment should be based on race, which I believe, as you said, Ms. McKayser, it should be based on race, of course, because, 400 years of oppression and all that. And where you liberals would say it should be based on economic disadvantage. Come on. Surely people believe what I believe, Terence, that it should be race. That's the proxy for empowerment.
No, not really. Look, we put the question. What do you want? What can the government do to improve your life?
Yeah.
And not just ourselves, but others as well. And over time, the most fundamental thing is creating jobs. 26% of our sample, top number. Interestingly, you find that registers most powerfully with African and coloured respondents, and let's say although still prominently less so amongst Indians and whites. I think there's a lot that is more to do with your socioeconomic status and your personal life chances. A job for a person in a squatter camp is game changing. For somebody whose dad has a white collar job and goes to a nice middle class school, there's sort of the assumption that you'll get a job. And still, certainly the an economy that values skills, capital, and connections. That puts those people in a decent position. Secondly, fighting corruption, improving education. Why is corruption so important? I would say, first of all, there's a lot of concern about what it's doing to the fabric of the country, but it also relates to things like housing lists. Wealthy people, and let's use the color coding here. Whites and Indians to a large extent too can sort of buy their way out of it on average. African people find that a lot more difficult because you're more reliant on those services. Fighting crime, solid 10%. Colored people seem to be particularly concerned about it. Indian people, strangely enough, no one seems to have noted that. But colored people, I imagine a lot of that has to do with gangs in the Western Cape.
Right.
We see more RDP housing, fighting drugs, drug abuse. One of those issues that is just almost absent from our mainstream conversation, or is treated as a sort of almost a first world problem, which is very, very real to people who live with it daily. Healthcare, some concerns about illegal immigration. Speeding up service delivery finally comes in at only 3% of the population. Then we get to, let's say, the issues that you could race code. Fighting racism, 2% of the population, including 2% of Black Africans. White and Indian people are more likely to be concerned about that on average. Speeding up land reform, also 2%. Despite all of the rhetoric around that. It's not to say none of these are important. I mean, of course, when you see an Adam Katsavelis or a Vicky Momberg who, I don't know, just doesn't seem to be able to restrain herself. Yes, I would. I can't imagine why a lawyer would agree to it. But I imagine that causes a particular turning of the stomach, particularly of African people. I think that scratches a lot of memories. But in as far as what it means to your day-to-day life, it means, I think, a lot more to people who think in more esoteric terms. Speeding up affirmative action, 1%. And I can tell you from previous work that I've done on business policy, and that you find small entrepreneurs of whatever color are incredibly frustrated about this. Technically they should be given a leg up, but the word you hear all the time, that's for Patrice Motsepe and that's for Cyril Ramaphosa, that's not for me.
I'm not. I'm done with Eusebius. But I wanted to open it up to everybody here because guys, this data is very instructive, isn't it? Insofar as and Terence really hit the nail on the head. There are daily issues that are faced by people, which are not of that abstract level, sort of talk radio type stuff. It's everyday stuff, isn't there, Gabriel?
Yeah, I just wanted to say also directly to the question of should people be chosen for jobs based on merit or on the basis of race quotas and stuff. We had, I think, 80% of respondents saying it should be on the basis of merit.
Absolutely.
Now, if you break up that 80%, the majority of that 80% say job selection should be based on merit, but there should be extra training going to people, skills development going to people that are disadvantaged, where it wasn't race as a proxy for disadvantage. If you're a black kid who's got rich parents and you're going to a private school and you're going to a nice university, I don't think you count as disadvantaged.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But we do. But anyway, and I think so. I think that's a majoritarian view. I think it's also a right view.
South Africans are very sensible. If you actually,
if you think how much the average South African has had to go through, I mean, and what does that mean? It's also not something that's totally. If you're in the former homelands, I think it means that you live in an economy where there's just no property that's backed up by the state.
Absolutely.
Everything is based on might is right. If you're the tough guy in the area, you'll probably be able to get something going for yourself. If you're not prepared to resort to violence or force or intimidation, then you're probably going to have nothing going for you. In the townships, It's in some townships, it's not so different. But even in the big cities, you know, if you like, I drive through Hillbrow every morning to get to work. People are up and at 'em nice and fresh and early, and they are pushing veggies and fruit around to try and get ahead. And what happens? Like, what happens to the rands that they are saving their wealth in? What happens to the little place that they're storing their stuff in? It's those massive buildings get burnt down because the fire codes aren't being respected. Police don't do their job there. It's very harsh, and it affects everyone. 500,000 deaths by violence since 1994, basically. Means everyone has a story to tell. Everyone knows someone
absolutely
who's been on the wrong end of that equation.
Look, I just like to add to that. You know, the question about saying yes, merit, but with special consideration for skills and whatever. I think that belies the idea that that South Africans are indifferent to the historical context. It's just I think. Let me be slightly heretical. You know, I don't think that some of our talk show hosts or whatever fulfill no useful function by raising these issues. Yeah. It's just sometimes I think that what we lose sight of is that the injustices that were committed in the past cannot be addressed simply by trying to restore something like that to the status quo ante. The society has changed radically. I mean, something like the importance of land ownership, or land reform, expropriation without compensation. I think that's a prime example. If we do land reform perfectly, maybe we add another 1 or 2% to our GDP growth rate, which we're doubling what we have now. So let's do it. But it's not game changing for a population that is now close to more than 2/3 urbanized. Certainly, I'm talking about land reform there in the agrarian sense.
Yes.
60 years ago, agriculture made up 60% of GDP. Yeah. Now it makes 2 or 3% of GDP.
Yeah. Now, if I can just point something out, that there are findings here that do give us cause for concern. Yep. One of them, for instance, if you ask, have race relations improved since 1994? Amongst Black Africans, you see actually a lot of optimism about that. Yep. Amongst all the minority communities, there's a larger proportion think that things have got worse. Now, and then we ask another question: is South Africa kind of a country for Black people and others must learn to take?
Yes.
You find a large portion of Black respondents saying yes to that. Now, what this tells me is that the milieu of our politics has created a situation which has influenced both the perceptions and the views of what are fundamentally moderate people around across the board, to heighten fear in some and let's say a kind of aggressiveness in others. Now, I recently wrote a piece about that, and I quoted the astrophysicist Carl Sagan.
Yeah, sorry, just to the mic. Sorry,
yeah, and he said that the great revelation of the age of space exploration was seeing the Earth as this tiny blue crescent, and as you draw away from it, it just becomes that much less significant. And he said that there is a consciousness that is emerging on the Earth that it's one organism, and an organism at war with itself is doomed.
Sure.
And I think that is that's something that speaks very powerfully to South African history. R.W. Johnson likes to say that in the colonial era, in the apartheid era, the idea was how could this country be ruled without reference to its majority? Under the ANC, that's sort of been turned around. How can this be ruled to some extent to the exclusion of its minorities? You can't do either.
In answer to the issue of 300 years of oppression and the extent to which that determines what happens next, there's a maxim, and I think it's fundamentally common sense. Your past must influence your future, not dictate it. And the problem is that a sense of grievance, while understandable, because actually more people than most people think have some real grievance from the past, it's not going to get you education, it's not going to get you training. You have to find the education, you have to find the training, the state has to make it available, and then you've got to immerse yourself in it and try and get the skills you need. Being hurt and being the subject of discrimination itself is going to give you nothing.
Guys, we've painted, and we'll move on just now, but I really think this Unite the Middle campaign that the IRR has launched is super important, especially in today's racially charged and divisive and polarizing rhetoric. And the Hope Report for me is very instructive around what real opinion says in this country versus what we're told by different vested interest groupings, each of them wanting to an extent, have a fiefdom of people that they call my people. We see this a lot from politicians. And at the heart of it is just this weird, it's a refusal really to try and build a country that actually is united. And again, I don't mean this in like sort of, hippie type,
it's not a kumbaya thing. It's a work
like that,
it's a work thing.
Absolutely. It's people waking up every day and saying, you know what, my little contribution to my bit in pursuing my own self-interests benefits not only me, but my family. Where it benefits my family, it means we're able to deal with the headwinds of a souring economy, et cetera, much better than if I wasn't employed, for example, if I wasn't this or I wasn't that. And this is what I meant by South Africans are very sensible, because if you talk to them in these terms, they get it. They get that if I have an income, from that I build savings. From those savings, I can buy options for me and my family. I'm able to stave off the ill effects of a bad economy, the ill effects of this and that, which is used by politicians to mobilize us, often as a this grouping versus that grouping. There is something to be said. I want to throw this to us as classical liberals on there, but there's something to be said then on empowering the individual and really the family, isn't there?
Yeah. If I can swing in with something about that, I think that one of the things that I don't appreciate very much about what some of our radio hosts, and we refer to one in particular, do is discipline their listeners and their readership. When I've last listened to Eusebius McKaiser's show, I heard people call in with reasonable views. As the majority of South Africans seem to think that all of this talk of race and colonialism, of this 300, 400 years kind of thing that you have to rectify, is pushed by politicians who are trying to make excuses for their own failures. Failures that are very tangible and that are in the future. And I've heard callers time and again call into 702 and call into SAFM and be disciplined by the hosts and be harassed effectively by those hosts, saying, why? Like, who's putting you up to this? And I see the same thing on social media. Yesterday I saw someone in reference to the Hope Report refer to a black individual who'd come forward to say, yeah, this chimes in with my experience, and saying you're a bot. So you're a robot. So like if black people make their voices heard in moderate terms, they're either slandered as bots or as puppets where other people are paying them or pulling their strings, or as self-hating, self-colonized, somehow inauthentic people. And so I think that part of, and as Terence pointed out, the worrying thing is that intimidation, fear, and emboldening hyper-aggressive types, over time, no social fabric is so strong that it can endure that kind of thing forever. And so I think a big part of what the Hope Report should do is it should just make people feel a little bit uncomfortable when they listen to a show on the radio or watch a show on the TV and hear that everyone feels the same. Absolutely. That everyone feels that this is a team sport, that life is a team sport and the teams are defined by your race. So that if I'm poor, but someone else happens to look like me, is very rich, that makes me better off. Because that is an age-old excuse for elites to keep their boots on the faces of the oppressed, is to say, but didn't you notice how we look alike?
I think radio, the medium of radio, is probably the biggest culprit in this regard. Because the presenters who've now work on purely a basis of, I believe X, I'm going to present it, and they literally, they slam anyone who tries to come on with something else. And I think what's happened as a result is that people with opposing views just aren't phoning in, or what's happening is they're being screened out. Yeah. So you don't have it, and you have that sort of what I call the radio or the presenters of political outrage, and the culpability is absolutely enormous because the consequences are exactly as Gabriel said, and I think I actually think that in some respects they're sort of removing themselves from everybody's daily life because no one's learning anything. They're just being exposed to people's opinions.
Well, if I can, if I can chime in there, I was on a talk show some months ago, and the presenter thought he has got his gotcha moment. He said, "What is your agenda with this expropriation without compensation?" And I said, to stop it.
Yes. Very straightforward.
And I said, well, but what do you really stand for? And I said, well, it's on our website and it's on the wall of our building. We stand for classic liberalism, free markets, democracy, free speech, individual, the worth of each individual. Says there's no secret there. And if you'd like to invite me on again, I'm happy to come and discuss this. Yes, I agree with what the both of you are saying. The sort of beating of the drum, as opposed to providing a platform where these things can be aired. It creates a kind of what I would regard as a false dialogue where we discuss things with the intention to reach a preordained result. Look, in respect to Mr. McKaiser, I would say that his producers at least put a number of contrary views on the table. Yeah. But once again, I think that he would actually do himself a great service by paying more sort of attention to them rather than looking for the sort of slam back moment.
Yeah.
I remember once a guy phoned up and said that his best friend is black. I mean, let's say it was a very unwoke response, and and we've never had any problems. We've known each other since we were kids. And he said, "What are you studying at university?" So I'm doing a BCom. I suggest you do an arts degree and learn something about the way other people think, because I can tell you your friend doesn't think that way.
I thought there was how your friend thinks that I've never met, because
I thought that's
brain cells and pigment cells are the same thing.
Well, look. I mean that. In deference to absolute truth, working strictly from memory here. But yes, it just seems to me to be, I know the answer. I'm simply offering you the opportunity to ask the question, to learn that answer. Human beings are complicated, and I think that's those nuances that too many of us are often willing to let fall through the cracks.
Just don't talk on anybody else's behalf,
guys. As we maybe look to conclude, just a quick reminder, guys, speaking to the mics, as we look to conclude, and before I do any of that, actually, what I'll do is I'll just say, I'll go around the table, just any other things you guys want to chip in before we have final word. This Hope Report is on our website, guys. You can access it at irr.org.za under the reports section. I really strongly encourage you guys to give it a read and have a look at what the data actually shows on this issue. And again, look out for also some of the other stuff that we'll be doing as part of the Unite the Middle campaign, because this really is an important campaign that I think has to be top of mind for a lot of South Africans. Guys, final thoughts, any other topics you want to bring up? Sorry, I'm going to look to you because there's a list in front of you.
I'm not going to go through the list, but just as interest, because it may have an effect on our trade relationships with Britain, is that Boris Johnson won the first round in the Conservative leadership elections, but by more than double his closest rival, who was Jeremy Hunt. So it was like 114 votes to 43. Sure. So we may just be facing a world of politics by silly hairdo,
Gabriel, I'm looking at you because I know.
That's the segue there to the silly face hairdo.
Gabriel, Boris Johnson, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit, if you're okay with that. What do we know about him? Is he someone who the world needs as the leader of Britain at the moment?
So, I'm not prepared for this, but
all right.
I'll tell you what I think about Boris Johnson. I've read his biography of Churchill, and I think for people who think that he's stupid or that he's like a dummy or that he shoots from the hip, they should really give it a read. It's thoroughly written. It's very persuasively and poetically written, and I think that one of the things that he tries to do in that book is give a look at a bigger question around colonialism, Britain's colonial history, which, like Churchill, is complicated. The thing about the United Kingdom's colonial history is that it includes the singular event of abolishing slavery, first inside the United Kingdom and then inside the waters that it policed. And it's hard to think of an achievement of any country that exceeds that. in terms of humanity, in terms of going against their political and economic interests at the time that they did it, looking at for the long view and seeing how things had to be. Of course, on the other hand, the Brits really did some dastardly things as colonists. And what Johnson gets that his enemies don't get is that the world is better if you look into the complicated reality and try to learn from the good, try to learn also from the bad, and move forward from that kind of a position. Johnson's critics often do resort to just mentioning his hairdo and sort of one or two personal idiosyncrasies to do with women and whatever, his sex life basically, when trying to criticize him as a politician. And I think that's because they, generally speaking, their understanding of the history of the United Kingdom is there was some bad stuff. That's all we should look at, and that's all we should ever think about. Boris Johnson's done some silly things, said some silly things. That's all we should think about. That's all we should ever look at. I think that he's more complicated than that. I think he's much more complicated than some of his opponents think that he is. I think his opening campaign video where he just went out and knocked on doors and spoke to ordinary people, I think he hasn't spoken to the press for the last week because he wants people to look at that. Because it's how politicians, I think, operate when they operate well. I'd like to see some of our politicians do a bit of that. Just go out there and talk to people. And also our radio presenters and our editors. Anyone who wants to speak on behalf of other people should take the effort of getting out of their car and going to speak to people that you don't know, not people that your family have hooked you up with or whatever. Speak to people you don't know and see what comes out of that. And I think you'll find that most people are, I think our surveys indicate and our kind of travels indicate that most people are very worried. They hold on to optimism, but they're worried about the direction that we've been taking. And I think they're right to be. And I think that we need to pierce that sort of ceiling that prevents us from connecting with one another in the upper organized branches of our politics. And that's what Johnson does, right? Johnson makes ordinary working class people feel like they're being heard in Westminster because they are to a level being heard in Westminster, and by someone who can also engage in repartee with fancy Oxford dons. We need some of that here.
Guys, let me do this. Final word from everybody, and I'll let in your final word, just let the folks know what they can maybe look forward to in terms of your upcoming writing in the week. And if you do have social media, you're welcome to pump that also so people can follow you. Gabriel, I'll go back to you. But just remind the guys, lean into the mic, please, when you talk.
Yeah. So final word for me would be, in terms of things that you should expect coming up, I've got a couple of pieces coming up about investigations that I've been doing in the Western Cape and in KZN. Just keep an eye out next week. I don't want to say any more than that. Yeah, and in terms of the Hope Report, if you're a South African, like whether you like the Institute of Race Relations or not, just give it a look, inform yourself, and move from there.
Terence?
More on the big issues facing the country. Some work on mining coming out. Some work on expropriation without compensation and land reform. The presidential advisory panel on land reform has given its report. We await the outcome of that. And as Gabriel says, even for those who disagree with us sharply, have a look at what we have, and certainly point out errors if you can find them. Just don't attribute those to people's melanin or lack thereof.
Perhaps I can just add for the uncertainty about the IRR. We're generally accused of being negative, which probably on the face of it we are, because there are negative things happening and we're calling them out. So the fact that we present a report that's positive, that reflects a positive scenario, to suddenly sort of accuse us of sort of false rainbowism, if it were negative, it would be another negative report by us, but it's not. And that, I think, is what has been borne in mind when people look at it. From the point of view of what I'm doing, I'm starting to make contact with organizations we don't not affiliated to, but just to look at assisting them to get the liberal message out. That's one thing. I hope to finish an article for publication tomorrow on the Chernobyl idea, take it to a specific point. And then I'm finishing an article on the Israel-Palestine conflict, and that is really basically saying, if you read what people's manifestos are, and if you read what the political, military, Islamic groups are saying about the relationship with Israel, it's a war. It is not it's not merely a conflict over land. It's a war. And I think too few people who are not engaged in that area don't understand that.
Exactly. Hear you on that. Guys, let me say thank you to all of you for this really interesting edition of The Daily Friend, including the Daily Friend podcast, which will release on the Iona website. Guys, we talk a lot about the issues that we face as South Africans, but I really do encourage you to read our work. See exactly where we're coming from. Don't just take it from secondhand sources who have their own agendas on painting us as to who we are. We're classical liberals, and we'll stand for individuals, we'll stand for your rights to be able to pursue your life in the way in which you want to pursue it, for you to pursue your own self-interests. And a lot of our work is framed within that prism. So check it out. As you said, the Hope Report is on our website under the report section. And the other thing I often encourage you guys to do is to support our work, support us. We are wholly dependent on you, the viewer, you, the reader of our work. So become a friend of the IRR. This is our crowdfunding campaign where ordinary South Africans, people like you and me, have been donating between 70 and 90 Rand per month towards the work that we do here. And you can become a friend by SMSing your name to 32823. Terms and conditions do apply. And an SMS will cost you 1 Rand. But if you don't like SMSs, because you are just slick like that, then you're welcome to find us online at irr.org.za/join. And you can sign up a monthly debit order there. Guys, remember to read our material, all our work on the Daily Friend website. That's dailyfriend.co.za. And of course, you will find this show on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays on our YouTube channels, both the IRR YouTube channel and the Big Liberty Show, or Big Daddy Liberty YouTube page. Remember to hit that notification bell so that you're notified every time we put stuff out. And remember to like and share our shows. Guys, thank you so much for listening and watching the Friday edition of the show and the podcast. We'll see you next week when Gabriel is at the helm of the show. Guys, enjoy the weekend.